The Alpha searched for a new Luna, using his disabled son as the test, until one Omega refused. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs that surrounded the Alpha's castle, carrying the scent of the dark forest below. The sun had disappeared behind heavy clouds, leaving the towers and ramparts in a gray, almost lifeless light. Inside, the castle hummed with the weight of tradition and expectation. Every stone seemed to remember generations of Alphas and Lunas, their victories and their failures etched into the walls. And tonight, the Alpha prepared for a decision that would change everything. Kale the Alpha stood at the edge of the highest balcony, his eyes tracing the endless forest below. He was tall, broad, and imposing, the kind of presence that could command a room with a single glance. But inside, a storm raged far fiercer than the one outside. His son, Iron, was unlike the children he had expected to raise. Born with a body that could not move as freely as others, Iron had been called weak by some in the pack, though Kale never said it aloud. He loved his son deeply, even if that love was wrapped in a shroud of duty and fear. Kale's thoughts turned to the Luna, the mate who would walk beside him in power and bloodline. Tradition demanded that she be strong, clever, and, most importantly, compatible with his son. Every Omega brought into the castle would be tested, not by him, but by the child he protected fiercely. It was an unfair system, even by the harsh rules of their pack, but Kale could not escape it. To allow weakness in his line, he thought, would be to invite ruin. In the dim light of the hall, Iron sat near the hearth, wrapped in a thick cloak. The fire cast shadows over his pale, thoughtful face. Though his body betrayed him, his mind was sharp. He watched his father's preparations silently, understanding more than the Alpha imagined. Iron had learned early that every visitor to their home came with hidden motives, and he had learned to read the currents of power that flowed between people. Tonight, the first Omega would arrive. She was young, carefully trained in the ways of the pack, and unaware that she would not only meet the Alpha but also face his son in ways no other child had been asked to do. For Kale, the test was simple: see if she could treat his son with kindness, patience, and respect. If she could, she might earn his trust. If not, she would be sent away, and the search would continue. The gates opened with a heavy groan, and a figure stepped into the castle courtyard. A hush fell over the guards and servants as the young Omega moved forward. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her dark hair braided neatly down her back, her eyes calm but watchful. She was clearly aware of the castle's reputation, but she did not falter. Iron's eyes followed her. He felt something unfamiliar, a spark of curiosity that made him sit a little straighter, even in his chair. The Alpha noticed, too, and a flicker of emotion crossed his stern face. Perhaps this Omega would be different. Perhaps she could be the one who would change the rigid rules of their home. The Omega was brought before Kale in the great hall, where the air was heavy with candle smoke and the quiet hum of expectation. She knelt respectfully, bowing her head, but her eyes lifted to meet his. There was no fear there, only measured observation. Kale's gaze swept over her, noting the strength in her posture, the steadiness in her breathing, the calm that did not bend to his power. "You are aware of why you are here," Kale said, his voice deep and commanding, echoing against the stone walls. "You will be tested by my son. Your treatment of him will decide your place in this castle, and perhaps your place in my life." The Omega inclined her head once. "I understand," she said simply. Her voice was steady, clear, and carried no hint of hesitation. Kale gestured toward Iron, who watched silently from the hearth. The boy's small hands clutched a blanket around his legs, but his eyes were sharp and searching. The Omega approached slowly, kneeling at a respectful distance. She did not speak immediately, instead letting her gaze meet Iron's. "You don't have to be afraid," she said softly. "I am not here to hurt you." Iron blinked, surprised. Most visitors had ignored him or looked at him with pity. No one had spoken to him like this before. Hesitant, he shifted in his seat, testing the Omega with a small nod. Kale observed closely, his jaw tight. He was used to control, to bending others to his will. And yet he felt a strange unease as he watched the two of them interact. There was no immediate compliance, no obvious submission. The Omega treated his son with patience, answering his questions carefully, waiting when he struggled and speaking plainly when he asked for explanation. Hours passed like this. The Alpha watched as she carried books to Iron, helped him with small exercises, and laughed quietly when he made a clever observation. There was no sign of flattery or fear in her actions, only steady, calm attention. And in that attention, something stirred in Kale's heart that he had not felt in years. But not all tests are simple. Kale had arranged challenges for her, small tasks that required strength, patience, and empathy. The first was to navigate the castle's labyrinth of hallways with Iron relying on her guidance. Many Omegas had failed such tasks, becoming frustrated or impatient. The young Omega moved slowly, always letting Iron decide the pace. She encouraged him, never mocked, never scolded. For the first time, the Alpha wondered if a Luna could truly be more than a figure of strength, if she could embody understanding. Even so, Kale's pride and tradition weighed heavily on him. He had raised Iron in a world that did not forgive weakness, and part of him feared that this Omega's kindness might not be enough. Strength was measured in survival, in dominance, and in bending others to the pack's will. Could compassion truly pass the test? As evening fell and the castle grew darker, Kale moved silently to a side balcony, watching the interaction between his son and the Omega from a distance. He could see Iron laughing softly, something that had rarely happened in the shadow of the castle. And he could see the Omega leaning close, listening to him, encouraging him, respecting him. A part of him, a part he had long buried beneath duty and tradition, wanted to step forward to join them, to admit that perhaps he had judged too harshly. But the Alpha did not move. Power, tradition, and pride still bound him, and he had learned that such things were not given lightly. Then, quietly, Iron spoke. "She doesn't need to follow your rules," he said softly, looking toward his father. "She treats me like I am, like I matter." Kale's hand clenched on the balcony's stone railing. The words cut deeper than he expected. They were simple, yet they carried truth, truth he had long avoided. He had always believed that his son's disability made him less, but the Omega had shown him another path. One of respect, one of attention, one of care. The first Omega, who had arrived with her head held high and her voice calm, looked at Iron, then back at Kale, her eyes unwavering. She did not bow, she did not plead. She simply existed in the space between tradition and change, showing that courage could take forms beyond strength or obedience. Kale felt something stir in him, curiosity, respect, and a reluctant admiration. Yet even as he acknowledged it, he felt a flicker of anger. How dare she challenge him? How dare she make him feel uncertain in a world built on certainty? He had ruled for years with unquestioned authority, and now, a single Omega dared to reshape his understanding. The evening ended not with a declaration or a victory, but with a quiet tension. The Alpha withdrew to his private chambers, his mind spinning. The castle was silent now, but the echoes of what he had witnessed lingered in the corridors, in the halls, and in his heart. Iron, wrapped in his cloak near the dying fire, watched the Omega leave for the night. His heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, he sensed a possibility that the world might not be entirely cruel, that someone might see him as he truly was, not as a test or a weakness. Outside, the wind whispered through the dark forest, carrying secrets and portents. And far above, on the balcony, Kale stood alone, staring at the horizon, aware that the rules he had lived by for decades were shifting. A shadow of change had entered the castle, and neither he nor his son would ever be the same. And somewhere in the dark, the forest seemed to stir, as if acknowledging that the first step toward a new future had been taken. but also hinting that the path ahead would not be easy, and that challenges greater than the Alpha's pride were yet to come. The castle was quiet the next morning, though the halls were heavy with the weight of yesterday's events. The Alpha, Kale, moved through them silently, his boots echoing against cold stone. He could still feel the Omega's presence lingering in the air, like a calm that refused to be ignored. Her defiance had unsettled him more than any challenge or enemy ever could. Iron watched from the hearth, his pale fingers tracing patterns on the blanket that draped his legs. He had barely slept, his mind alive with thoughts of the Omega. She had treated him like a person, not a burden, not a test. For the first time he felt something he had not known in the strict walls of the castle: hope. Kale paused at the doorway of his son's chamber. The boy looked up, his gray eyes wide and questioning. Kale's voice was low, almost hesitant. "She is not like the others," he said. "She challenges what we have always known. That is dangerous." Iron smiled faintly, though there was caution in it. "Maybe some things need to be challenged, father. Maybe some rules are wrong." Kale's jaw tightened. His son's words, simple though they were, carried weight he could not ignore. The castle had always been ruled by strength and obedience, by rules passed down through generations of alphas. To consider breaking them was to invite uncertainty, and yet he could not dismiss the Omega's quiet courage. Later that day, the Omega returned, her steps careful but confident. She did not bow immediately, nor did she wait for an invitation. Instead, she moved toward Iron, kneeling at a respectful distance. "Good morning, Iron," she said softly. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of warmth. "Are you ready for today?" Iron nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes," he said, "but will father watch again?" The Omega's eyes flicked toward Kale, who stood a few paces away, his arms crossed over his chest. There was curiosity there, but also restraint. She nodded once. "He is watching," she said, "but we will do this together. You are not alone." The day's test began in the castle gardens, a labyrinth of hedges and stone pathways designed to challenge both mind and patience. Many Omegas had entered the maze with confidence, but they had grown frustrated when Iron could not move quickly or when his instructions were unclear. They had scolded, rushed, or given up. Not her. She followed his pace, letting him lead when he wished. She encouraged him, celebrated small victories, and guided him with gentle words rather than commands. Iron's heart swelled with pride. For the first time, he felt like his limitations were not a measure of failure, but a part of who he was. Kale observed from the balcony above. He could see the interaction clearly, and each passing moment chipped away at the rigidity he had maintained for decades. He had believed that strength alone dictated survival, that weakness was dangerous. Yet here was someone who demonstrated a different kind of power, the power of patience, understanding, and quiet courage. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, casting golden light across the hedges. Iron laughed more freely than he ever had, and the Omega's presence seemed to bring life to the stone and soil around them. Kale could not deny the change he saw in his son. There was growth, confidence, and a joy that had been missing from their castle for years. Still, Kale's pride would not allow him to be entirely swayed. He summoned the next challenge, a series of physical tasks designed to test courage. Iron could not participate fully, but the Omega adapted, carrying out the challenges alongside him, ensuring that he could observe and learn without fear. She did not flaunt her strength, nor did she use it to dominate. She used it to protect, to encourage, and to teach. At one point, a heavy beam fell unexpectedly in the training yard. Many Omegas would have hesitated, afraid to risk their own safety. But she moved with precision, shielding Iron and ensuring no harm came to him. Kale's chest tightened as he watched. The gesture was simple, yet it carried weight beyond any command or test. Courage, he realized, was not only in strength, it was in the heart. After the exercises, the three of them returned to the great hall. Iron moved more confidently now, his voice stronger, his steps surer. He felt proud, not only because of what he had accomplished, but because he had been seen, truly seen, by someone who did not judge him for his disability. Kale remained silent, pacing the stone floor. He could feel the tension between them, not in anger but in something deeper. The Omega had not sought his approval, yet she had earned his son's trust, and in doing so, she had challenged him in ways he had not anticipated. That night, Kale retired to his private chambers, but sleep did not come easily. His mind wandered back to the Omega's quiet defiance, to the ease with which she moved around Iron, and to the strength of her presence that refused to bow to tradition. For the first time in years, he questioned the rules he had followed so strictly. Perhaps strength was not measured in control, dominance, or fear, he thought. Perhaps it was measured in love, courage, and the ability to see value where others saw weakness. Meanwhile, Iron sat by the fire, his thoughts full of the Omega's kindness. He had grown to trust her quickly, to share his thoughts and fears, and to believe in himself in a way he never had before. Her presence gave him strength, not because she wielded it, but because she reflected it back to him. As the moon rose, casting silver light through the castle windows, a soft knock came at the Alpha's door. The Omega entered quietly, her steps careful, her eyes alert. She did not bow, she did not speak first. Instead, she approached Kale directly, meeting his gaze. "You are troubled," she said simply. Her voice was calm but carried an understanding that few had ever offered him. Kale's lips pressed into a thin line. "I am not troubled," he replied, though his tone betrayed him. "I am considering matters of the pack." She tilted her head slightly as if she understood more than he said. "Matters of the pack and of your son," she added softly. "You worry for him, you wish him to be strong. You think strength is everything." Kale's eyes darkened. "It must be. The pack cannot survive weakness." The Omega shook her head gently. "Perhaps you have misunderstood what strength can be. Perhaps strength is not only in the body, but in the heart, in courage, in the way we protect and care for those who cannot protect themselves." Kale's chest tightened. Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth he could not dismiss. For decades, he had ruled by fear and tradition. And yet, here was someone, an Omega, challenging the very foundations of his beliefs with quiet clarity. Iron, who had been listening from the shadows, felt a thrill of hope. She was speaking the truth he had always longed to hear. Maybe the world could be different. Maybe someone could see him as he truly was, and not as a test or a measure of weakness. Before Kale could respond, a loud howl echoed through the night, rising from the forest beyond the castle walls. The sound was long, mournful, and filled with a power that made the stone walls tremble. Iron's heart skipped a beat, and Kale's eyes narrowed. The Omega rose to her feet, her expression calm but alert. "It comes," she said quietly. "The forest has begun to stir. There are forces at work beyond our understanding." Kale felt a shiver run down his spine. The howl was not just a sound, it was a warning. Something old and powerful was moving, something tied to the history of their pack and the castle itself. The rules and traditions that had governed their lives might not be enough to face what was coming. Iron moved closer to the Omega, feeling a sense of safety in her presence. For the first time, he believed that together they could face whatever lay ahead. He glanced at his father, who stood rigid by the window, his mind racing. The Alpha's control, his pride, and his sense of duty were challenged as never before. And deep inside, he knew that the coming trials would force him to reconsider everything he believed about strength, loyalty, and love. The Omega turned to the boy, her eyes soft. "You have a choice," she said. "You can fear what is coming, or you can face it with courage. The world is larger than the castle, Iron. You are larger than the limits others have set for you." Iron felt a surge of determination. For the first time, he did not feel small or helpless. With her guidance, he could confront whatever dangers awaited him, be they in the forest, in the castle, or within his own family's history. Kale remained silent, his hands clenched at his sides. The howl of the forest lingered in his ears, and he realized that this Omega, defiant, calm, and brave, was more than a challenge to tradition. She was a key to survival, to change, and perhaps even to redemption. The night grew darker and the wind howled louder, carrying with it whispers of ancient power. Kale knew the tests were only beginning. The Omega had refused to bend, and in that refusal she had altered the balance of the castle, the sun, and the Alpha himself. And somewhere deep in the forest, unseen eyes watched, waiting. Forces older than the castle stirred, drawn to the threads of courage and defiance that now intertwined within its walls. The Alpha turned from the window, his mind racing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and perhaps dangers the pack had never faced. But one truth was clear: nothing, and no one, would ever be the same again. The forest beyond the castle stirred with a life older than the stone walls and towers. Shadows moved between the twisted trees, and the wind carried whispers that seemed almost human. The howl from the night before had not been the only warning. Now, as dawn crept over the jagged cliffs, a heavy sense of unease settled over the castle. Kale the Alpha stood on the balcony, his eyes scanning the dark treetops. The wind whipped at his cloak, but he barely noticed. He had never felt the forest like this before, alive, watching, waiting. A part of him knew that the forces within it were tied to the legacy of his bloodline, and a part of him feared what he could not control. Iron moved slowly along the hall, leaning on his cane, yet with a newfound confidence in his step. The Omega had stayed with him through the night, speaking of courage and of facing fear without surrendering to it. Her words had taken root in him, and he felt ready to confront the challenges that lay ahead, even the ones the forest might send. The Omega herself moved with quiet alertness. She had sensed the forest's change immediately, her sharp instincts noticing subtle shifts in the air, faint rustlings among the leaves, and a vibration that ran through the castle floor like a heartbeat. She knew the forest was more than a simple collection of trees. It was a force, ancient and patient, and it had chosen to make its presence known now. Kale's gaze fell upon her as she spoke to Iron. Something in the way she moved, the steadiness in her voice, and the calm in her eyes unsettled him. He was used to control, to giving orders, and to being obeyed without question. Yet here was someone who had neither fear nor submission, who dared to challenge tradition simply by existing in her own truth. "Father," Iron said, stopping near the balcony, "she says we must be ready. The forest, it's watching." Kale's jaw tightened. He had spent decades believing that strength alone dictated survival. Obedience, dominance, power, these were the rules that had guided his pack for generations. And yet, listening to the Omega's calm guidance and seeing the confidence in his son, he began to understand that survival might demand more than force. It might demand trust, courage, and wisdom beyond measure. Before he could respond, the castle's great doors slammed open, and a gust of cold air swept through the hall. The forest's whispers seemed louder now, more insistent. Shadows flickered across the walls, and Iron instinctively stepped back, though the Omega reached out and took his hand. "Do not fear," she said softly. "You are safe with me." The Alpha's eyes narrowed. "Safe," he repeated almost to himself. The forest's energy was powerful, ancient, and unknowable. He had faced many threats in his life, but this was beyond physical combat. It was a test of heart, courage, and understanding, and he could not predict its outcome. The first sign of the curse arrived shortly after noon. From the depths of the forest, a pale mist rolled in, curling around the castle walls like fingers. It was cold, unnatural, and silent. Iron shivered, not from the temperature but from the sense that the mist carried a purpose, a will of its own. The Omega guided him to a safe room in the castle, her hands firm on his shoulders. "This is not ordinary," she said. The forest tests the weak and the strong alike. We must remain steady. We must show courage. Kale watched from the balcony above, torn between instinct and intuition. His power as alpha had never prepared him for this. He had always relied on dominance, control, and fear. Now he realized that these tools were useless against a force that measured the heart and the spirit rather than the body. Hours passed, and the mist thickened. Strange shadows appeared at the edges of vision, moving with intent but never fully revealing themselves. Iron stayed close to the Omega, listening to her instructions and learning from her calm presence. She taught him how to breathe steadily, how to focus, and how to let courage guide action rather than fear. As night fell, the castle felt transformed. The halls were no longer simply stone and candlelight. They were alive with unseen energy. The Alpha descended from the balcony, moving quietly to join them in the safe room. He did not speak at first, but his presence was heavy with unspoken questions and concern. "You have changed him," Kale said finally, his voice low but carrying authority. "He is stronger, more confident than I have ever seen." The Omega looked up at him, her expression calm but unwavering. "He always had that strength," she said. "He simply needed someone to believe in it, someone to show him that courage is more than what the body can do. He has it in his heart." Kale felt a tension within him he could not easily release. Pride, fear, admiration, and longing all collided. He had spent years believing that strength was measured by dominance and tradition. And yet, here was someone, a mere Omega, teaching him lessons he had never considered. The forest's energy intensified. From the mist, shapes began to emerge, figures that seemed both animal and human, shadows with glowing eyes that watched, measured, and waited. The castle trembled slightly under the weight of their presence. Iron's hand tightened around the Omega's. "We must act," she said. "We cannot run. We cannot hide. We must face it with courage and unity." Kale moved forward. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to consider a different path. His son's life, his pack, and the future of his bloodline were all intertwined with this Omega's guidance. To survive, he must trust her, and perhaps even learn from her. The first encounter came at the castle gate. Shadowed figures emerged from the mist, their forms shifting like smoke. Iron instinctively stepped back, but the Omega held him firmly. "Stand tall," she whispered. "Face them, you are not afraid." Kale stepped to the side, his eyes scanning the approaching shapes. He had faced countless enemies in his life, rogues, rival alphas, and beasts of the forest, but nothing like this. The shadows did not attack immediately. They circled, testing, observing. It was a trial, not a battle. The Omega took a step forward, her voice calm but commanding. "We do not fight with fear," she said. "We stand with courage and with heart." Something shifted in the shadows. A low hum filled the air, resonant and powerful. Iron felt it in his chest, a vibration that seemed to awaken something within him. The shadows paused, almost reverent, as if acknowledging his presence and courage. Kale's breath caught. He realized that the power of the forest and its shadows was not to destroy, but to test. Strength alone would not win this trial. It would be heart, courage, and unity that determined survival. Hours passed as the shadows circled and tested them, and Iron learned to move with confidence, guided by the Omega. Kale observed silently, feeling the walls of his pride crumble slowly. He had always ruled through fear and tradition, but now he saw that love, respect, and guidance were far more powerful than domination. By the end of the night, the shadows began to recede, retreating into the forest with a soundless whisper. The mist lifted and the castle once again stood in relative calm. Iron sat near the hearth, his small body exhausted but his spirit stronger than ever. The Omega knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You were brave," she said. "Do not forget that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it." Kale, standing in the doorway, felt a strange warmth spread through him. For decades, he had measured the world in strength, power, and dominance. Now he realized that courage and compassion were just as vital, perhaps even more so. The night passed, and the castle fell into a quiet sleep. Outside, the forest remained alive, full of hidden energy and whispers. The shadows had tested them, but the trial was far from over. Kale knew this. The curse within the forest was ancient, patient, and persistent. It would return, bringing challenges that required more than strength or dominance to survive. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. With the Omega at his side and his son learning the true meaning of courage, perhaps the impossible could be faced. Perhaps the traditions of the past could bend to allow a future filled with understanding, strength, and love. Iron drifted into sleep, his small hand resting on the Omegas. Kale stood over them, watching, feeling a protective warmth he had rarely allowed himself. Somewhere in the forest, the shadows lingered, their eyes glinting in the moonlight. They were not gone, and they would return, but for now, there was a fragile peace. And as the first light of dawn broke over the cliffs, the Alpha realized that the true test had only begun. Not against the forest, not against tradition, but within the hearts of those he loved most. The castle was quiet before dawn, but the air was heavy with tension. The forest beyond the walls had grown restless again, and the mist that had once retreated now curled through the trees like living fingers, carrying an unseen power. Kale, the Alpha, stood at the highest balcony, his eyes tracing the distant shadows. He could feel the forest's energy pressing in, testing them once more. Inside the castle, Iron sat near the hearth, wrapped in a thick cloak. His face was pale but determined. He had learned courage in ways he never imagined, guided by the Omega's patient hand. Every trial, every shadow, every whisper of the forest had shaped him, and now he was ready to face whatever came next. The Omega moved beside him, her presence steady and calm. She had become more than a guide. She had become a protector, a mentor, and a friend. Her dark eyes reflected the firelight, bright with quiet determination. "Tonight," she said softly, "we must face the forest completely. This is the final test." Kale descended the balcony, his heavy boots echoing across the stone floors. He had spent years ruling with authority, and yet now he realized that power alone could not save them. He had seen the Omega's strength, Iron's courage, and understood at last that true leadership required heart as well as might. The three of them moved to the castle gate. Beyond it, the mist swirled thicker than ever, and the shadows of the forest seemed alive, watching, waiting. The Alpha drew a deep breath. Every instinct in him warned of danger, yet he stepped forward, the Omega and Iron close beside him. Together, they entered the mist. The air was cold and damp, filled with a low hum that vibrated through their bones. Shadows moved at the edges of vision, sometimes human, sometimes animal, shifting constantly. The forest seemed to judge them, measuring their courage, their unity, and their hearts. The first figure appeared, a shadowy wolf, larger than any creature they had seen, its eyes glowing like molten gold. It circled them slowly, watching their every move. Iron's grip tightened on the Omega's hand, but he did not step back. He had learned that fear was only power when you let it control you. The Omega knelt beside him. "Remember what you've learned," she whispered. "Stand tall, face it together." Kale stepped forward, his presence commanding yet tempered by caution. "We do not fear you," he said, his voice deep and steady. "We face what comes with courage and heart." The shadowed wolf paused as if surprised. Then, with a soundless leap, it vanished into the mist, replaced by multiple forms, figures of shadow, twisting and gliding among the trees, their glowing eyes focused on them. The forest had unleashed its final trial. Iron took a deep breath, steadying himself. He looked at the Omega and then at his father. "We are together," he said quietly. "We can do this." The Omega smiled faintly, proud. "Yes, together." The shadows circled them, testing, pushing, but never striking directly. The forest's power was not in brute force. It was in observation, in judgment. It measured their unity, their courage, and their willingness to act with heart rather than fear. Kale moved beside his son and the Omega. He had fought countless battles, ruled with an iron fist, and commanded obedience from all who served him. Yet now he felt a new kind of tension, one that demanded humility, wisdom, and trust. The forest's trial was not a battle of strength but a test of their very spirits. Suddenly the shadows surged forward not to attack but to force them apart. Iron stumbled and instinctively the Omega caught him. Kale reached out, pulling them both close. "Hold fast," he commanded, though his voice was softer than usual. "Do not let fear divide us." They moved as one, step by step, through the forest's thickening mist. Every rustle, every shadow, every whisper seemed designed to unsettle them. But Iron's confidence, the Omega's calm guidance, and Kale's protective strength formed a bond that the forest could not break. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing at the heart of the forest. The mist swirled around them, and in its center stood a figure, a shadow that seemed older than time, its eyes glowing with the wisdom and power of countless generations. "You have come far," the voice echoed, not in the air but in their minds. "You have faced fear, uncertainty, and judgment. The strength of blood is not enough to pass my test. Only the strength of heart, courage, and unity can succeed." Iron stepped forward, his small body trembling but his eyes bright. "We are ready," he said firmly. "We will not let fear rule us." The Omega nodded beside him. "We face this together," she said, "and we do so with trust, courage, and care." Kale's gaze swept over them, and for the first time he felt the full weight of leadership not as a burden but as a responsibility. "I stand with you both," he said, "and I will face whatever comes with heart and courage, not just strength." The shadow's form shifted, and the forest seemed to exhale. The mist lifted slowly, revealing the ancient trees, the paths, and the light of dawn breaking through the branches. The trial was complete. Iron's face lit with relief and pride. He had faced the shadows, guided by the Omega's wisdom and his father's protection, and had emerged stronger, braver, and more confident than ever. The Omega looked at Kale, her eyes reflecting the soft morning light. "You have learned well," she said gently. "Strength alone does not define the pack, nor does it define the future. Love, courage, and unity will guide it forward." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of the forest's lesson settle within him. For decades he had ruled with authority and fear. Now he understood that true leadership required compassion, respect, and the courage to embrace change. They returned to the castle together, their steps light, though their minds were filled with reflection. The shadows had tested them, the forest had judged them, and they had emerged not only unbroken but transformed. In the great hall, Kale stood before his son and the Omega. "Today, I have learned more than I ever imagined," he said. "I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act with heart. I have learned that strength is not measured only in the body, but in compassion, trust, and unity. And I have learned that the future of this pack depends on these truths." Iron smiled, feeling a pride he had never known. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and judgment, and he had not only survived but grown stronger. The forest's curse, once feared as a threat, had become a teacher, revealing lessons that even the Alpha needed to learn. The Omega knelt beside him. "You have all grown," she said softly. "Not just Iron, but you, Kale. You have faced the forest and discovered truths that were hidden by fear and tradition. Now you are ready for a future that is stronger, braver, and filled with heart." Kale reached out, resting a hand on the Omega's shoulder. "You have guided us," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not with dominance, not with fear, but with patience, courage, and care. You have earned your place, not because you passed a test, but because you chose to act with heart." The three of them stood together, watching the morning light spread across the castle and forest. The shadows were gone for now, and the mist had lifted, leaving the world clearer, brighter, and full of possibility. Iron stepped forward, holding the Omega's hand. We faced it together, he said, and together we will face everything else that comes. Kale's chest tightened with emotion. For years, he had believed that strength alone could protect his son, his pack, and his legacy. Now he understood that true protection came from love, courage, and unity. He looked at the Omega, then at Iron, and felt a sense of peace he had never known. The castle, once shadowed by fear and tradition, now seemed alive with promise. The forest had tested them, and the trial had been harsh, but it had revealed a truth deeper than any lesson Kale had learned in decades of rule, that courage and compassion were the true marks of strength, and that unity and love could overcome even the oldest curses. As the sun rose fully over the cliffs, the Alpha, the Omega, and Iron stood together on the balcony, their hands joined. The wind carried the scent of the forest, of flowers, and of something older, something timeless. And far below, in the forest that had once seemed so threatening, a soft rustle of leaves whispered through the trees. The shadows had retreated, but the memory of the trial remained, a reminder that courage, heart, and unity would always be needed, for challenges would rise again, but so would those who were brave enough to face them. Kale finally spoke, his voice steady, full of both authority and warmth. "We have survived," he said. "We have learned, and we will lead this pack into a future stronger than we ever imagined together." Iron's smile was bright, the Omega's eyes calm, and the Alpha's heart, once weighed down by pride and fear, was finally light. Together they had faced shadows, broken curses, and discovered the power of courage, love, and unity. The castle and forest were quiet now, but they knew that life would always hold challenges. Yet they also knew that together, no darkness could truly overcome them. And in that knowledge, they found not only victory but hope, a hope that would endure for generations to come.